Thank you so much. I was quite interested looking at the number of people that said they had an identity management system, but they sort of went like that. It's one of those things, isn't it? What does it actually mean? At University of East Anglia, we put a system in roughly 10 years ago-ish. And really what I want to talk to you about is partly the history of what we did and how we got there. But last night I was sort of lying thinking, oh, I don't know, have I got this completely wrong? Are people looking for something about lessons learned and funny stories or whatever? So I've got a few things in terms of things that have gone very badly wrong for us. And I'll try and drop those in as I go. So the reason I've got a saucepan on the front, you'll see there's a few references to ingredients, and then there's a picture at the end, which is really what we've actually ended up with rather than what we thought we'd end up with. So I wanted to talk about the sort of ingredients of our identity management to start with. We look at identity management in a very broad sense. So it's not just about a credential for logging onto a PC. It's about your identity in terms of campus card, physical access. So it's access to physical resources. It's about the compliance of actually being able to track who used what, and that's both physical and electronic. So it's rights management. It's about data consolidation as well. So we actually use our identity management system as a way to ensure that we get compliance of data between systems and ensuring data quality. So the two bits really that a lot of people look at in terms of identity management, those two green bits, the authentication and authorization. But actually most of our system is the stuff around that, not those bits are the simple bit, and it's the stuff around it that actually I think we've grown over the last 10, 12 years. So this slide will come up several times during the presentation. It's really just a sort of timeline, and I think when I've come to these present sort of things before, I've often gone away thinking, oh, there wasn't much useful there. But sometimes it's the validation of, oh, you had the same problem we did. And actually you go away and you think, oh, that's okay. At least we didn't make that mistake or whatever. So I thought I'll just go through a little bit of the history, some of the things that caused us to make specific decisions and actually change the direction of our identity management. So I got involved with the university back in, initially as an external consultant looking at estate systems, and I actually started at the university in 2000, January the 2nd, 2000, and my first job was fixing a Novell server which had told us it was on for 37,000 years because of a year 2000 bug. But the area that I was particularly interested in at the time was our sort of building management control, and we developed a system within the estates department to just consolidate 7 different access control systems and to bring data in from our student accommodation system, our HR system, to actually auto-provision the sort of group membership on that, so that we could actually give people physical access without having to drag and drop and whatever. So that was really the start, really, of our identity sort of journey. Underneath the line, there's a few things just to sort of get your head in gear in terms of timings of when things happened. So 2003, Facebook came out. So when we were starting on this journey, there was no such thing as social identities, and you might have had MySpace, I guess, but not much more. So early on in 2003, our library systems all moved to Athens Authentication. That was managed by EduServe in the cloud on their system. So you had a separate identity for your Athens ID. You had multiple identities for if you were staff and student. You'd have different logins, and you'd have different logins on every single system. So it was a bit of a mess. So really 2003 is when we started looking at trying to bring it all together. So this was just some of our initial objectives back 10 years ago. So the main thing, aggregating people data. A big one for us was about hub and spoke data feeds. What we were finding was that a lot of our systems would feed data in a sort of bunny hop along the chain, and at every single opportunity somebody would change something. So you'd put it on one system, and then an operator would go, that would get transferred overnight, and then an operator would go, oh, I'll just tweak that, and then it would go to another system, and then another, and then another. And actually we had one system which took 2 weeks to get updated. So you'd put a system on the HR system, a user on the HR system, 2 weeks later they'd get access to their email. And that was because it was always an overnight feed, and it was reliant on each system feeding another one. So we had a lot of people interfering with the data, and we had a lot of delays in the process. So that was, a big one was this hub and spoke data feed. So really feed it to one place and then feed it out. We were also at a point where we were just changing our student system, and we were looking at having to change a lot of our other corporate systems. So one of the things we wanted to do was to try and disconnect the data endpoint so that if we changed the system, we could take it out, put another one in, without really having to change the data feed side of it. So we put quite a lot of work into coming up with a sort of framework that we could do that with. And that's actually stood us in really good stead. So when we have changed systems, we've been able to pull them out. And actually even now, I'll get to it later, we're just moving off our identity management system onto a new one. And some of that we're just saying, well, we'll just keep the data feed the same and feed it again. So that's worked really well. Introducing centralized scheduling, and well, that's really about the timely transfer, so that everything gets fed from a central point and is a scheduled update. 90% of them are every 5 minutes. Some of them are every 1 minute. We've got a couple that are nightly, but mainly it's as near real time as we can get. Improving data feed security, that was a big one. We had a huge amount of data feeds where they were scripts. They had usernames and passwords coded into the script. They were plain text files being dumped in file shares all over the place. I'm sure all of you will go, yeah, we've had it, or we've still got it. Another one really was automating routine tasks. As I said, we had all these operators doing bits of work all over the place, and really there was no reason for them to do it. It could be automated, so we really wanted to push that out. And actually, I was saying to a colleague who's here today that when we started, we had something like 8 or 9 people who would be setting up accounts on different systems, and all of those people have gone now. We've still got 8 or 9 people, but they're now doing help desk calls because we're doing a lot more stuff. So we've not actually reduced the headcount at all, but what we've ended up doing is, because we're doing more, and the support has changed. So the other thing we're looking at was this central rights and authorization management. At the time, there was no way. The auditor came in and was saying, well, how do you know what this person has got access to? We couldn't in one place say, well, this person has got this level of access on the HR system and this level of access on the student system, and actually be able to show that. We would have to go to every single system. So what we wanted to do was to bring it all together. And really the sort of end point is just that single source. Who you are, where your data is, the master record is, what you can do, when you can do it, and how you do it, and try and bring all that together into a single system. So very early on, we developed this sort of data model. I shamelessly, the shape of it and the colours are all stolen from, I think it's Washington State University, who've got there's some really good stuff on their website actually in terms of sort of enterprise architecture and data modelling. But this really gives an idea of how we view our data. So the outer ring is really data that stays in a source system. It's not relevant to other systems. And so if you look at, I don't know, if we look at the financial data at the bottom here, we've got assets and suppliers, purchasing, vendors. Actually, suppliers and vendors at the moment, we're just looking at how we bring those into the middle so that we can actually get reports of which of our alumni work at people that sell us stuff. So we were actually, those 2 particular ones are actually moving, but at the time they would have stayed within the finance system. Then we've got the sort of inner ring is stuff that the master record for it is within that system, but actually we need to feed it out to other systems. So in the financial area, the ledger code is something that a lot of other systems need. So we know the master is there and it feeds. Obviously for human resources, we've got the staff and the department. So in our system, the department code and title is always mastered in the HR system and then feeds to every other place. And then if you look, academic student stuff, students' courses, modules, their timetable, are all things that other systems need to know. So we'll feed those. And then in the middle, we've got this idea of master data. So really it's about what we call a member, which is just a person. It doesn't really matter what they are: staff, student, visitor, professor, visiting professor. Actually, we've got fishermen on our system because we've got a lake and they register for car parking access. So it's anybody who has anything to do with the UEA. And then the other thing we have in the centre there is groups. And really the idea of having groups in the middle there is that's about that central authorisation. So all of the management of what you can do is managed within the identity management system. So the other thing we did early on was really looking at the sort of architecture side of what we wanted to do with our systems. This has changed sort of every year in terms of which systems are on it. It never stays the same. But we started with a whole load of systems. That's just a small section. We've got about 80 systems that Corporate Information Services look after. And one of our long-term objectives is to try and reduce that. Every week we get a new system coming along, so it never goes down. But in my mind, we're converging. So really the point of it was about the enterprise service bus. We've never done it. It's always been a pipe dream, but it's a concept we always use. So even with the way we transfer data in the identity management system, it's all based on the principle that you've got a message and you send it somewhere and then something picks it up. So really, and I think that's something we're looking at going forward, is that this idea that applications are coming in more like small apps and we want to be able to just plug them in and get data to and from them. So that's something we'll always look at. Identity management is really a core of it. We have our own in-house system at the moment called Spot, but we're moving to FIM, or what's now MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager, at the moment. So we're halfway through a project to do that. And then Enterprise CRM, that's the new bit. That's about all of the stuff like the suppliers and things. So that's the bit we're bringing in. And then single sign-on, again, authorization is a very big part of what we do. We only have one identity for you as a log-on, and we only have one Active Directory, and it does everything. So it's really about making sure that we keep that as a really core part. So in terms of the sort of unique identifier, when we started our journey, we had multiple logins for people, multiple campus cards, all sorts of stuff. So the idea was that we needed to have this identity which would live with you for life. And actually, it is your login. And the login has a hideous sequence of letters and numbers, which basically means we get 16 million a year variation, and that does us, and that will stay with you for life. So I had a member of staff start in my department, a month ago. She actually joined the university in 2005 when we went live with the identity management system. We've got all of the history of our students back to the 1960s when the university started. And on her record, we've got all of her identity from when she joined as an international student in our international school, joined the UEA, worked as a temp, left alumni record, came back as a master's student, left, came back as an employee, and all of that time she kept the same login, same email address, right the way through. The email address actually can change over time, because we will reuse them, because we don't really want people with an email address .1694. So that will change, but the login ID will always stay the same, and it will go right the way through. And that, at the time, that was partly about people wanting email for life. I don't know how many of you have done that. It was something that was always wanted at UEA, but nobody really knew if it would work, and actually doesn't. Nowadays, people are like, forget it, it's old story. So although we have one identity, we have multiple identifiers. So you've got your AD login, but campus card number, student number, employee number, library barcode, HISA number, CAS number, national insurance number, there's all of them. So actually on our campus card, we've got 4 identities just on the one campus card. But our identity management system manages that and combines them all. So we know that one person, what are all of your identities. And I think one of the challenges we've had is where we think something's unique and it's not. So we thought national insurance number would always be unique. It turns out that we've got I think we originally had 36 people with the same national insurance number. We've now got 27. And that's because, and that does change over time, because you get a temporary national insurance number when you start work. And that's based on your initials and your date of birth. And so, surprisingly, you think, so then we had to put extra code in to stop those people getting duplicated and matching. HISA numbers, again, they're not always unique. And when the unique learner number came in, that was a surprise to us, that, oh, we'll use the same logic, so you get duplicate numbers. So your unique learner number could be the same as your HISA number. So we've had to put a lot of stuff around to try and stop those links happening. We did have an interesting case where in our student records office they were trying to fix some HISA returns, and they downloaded all of the data into a spreadsheet, and they changed a few bits around and sorted it out, and at some point somebody deleted a cell, and then they re-imported it into the student record system, and it basically changed about 2,000 people's HISA number. And the identity management system did what it was supposed to do. It picked up the record and it went, it's changed. You've got a different HISA number. I'll link you to all the records with that same HISA number, which of course was a different student. That was one of the downsides of automating stuff, is that it took us about 4 weeks to clean it all up and roll it back. And actually it's formed a part of a sort of disaster recovery planning session that we've run, which was a sort of a 1 week session right through the university, where we started off from the premise that somebody had done something which had corrupted the HISA numbers in the student record system, and that had flowed through the whole system. So you immediately get situations where a student would log on and get somebody else's marks, somebody else's personal data. And actually, as a scenario, it's quite an interesting one to look at, because it's not that you've lost the whole system, it's just you've got this mismatch of data. And so from a data protection point of view, it really did sharpen people in terms of how do we manage this sort of situation. So I talked about that bit. I'll skip through this bit a bit. So I was talking about the sort of framework that we use. So this is just within SPOT. We have RL is our resource link HR system. SITS would be our student record system. So we have the idea of a bespoke adapter, and that really is the bit that's unique to the system. So it will use whatever API is available, deep linking into the database if we have to. But everything that comes out of that is in a standard XML format. And really, as we're going to MIM, what we can do is change the middle bit, the in-web service and SPOT, to MIM, but leave the endpoints at the applications roughly the same. So actually, we've sort of ended up with quite a nice situation that we can take the whole middle out and drop something else in. So what would normally happen is the web service is constantly polling, picks the data up, SPOT does its stuff, and then spits out and says, okay, you're an employee, you happen to be a staff member who teaches, therefore you need to be in the student record system, and it will push that record across. Now you won't be able to read this. The slides I think are shared on the USISA site, but this is our deduplication algorithm. Basically what we do is within our identity management we completely automate the process of linking people between different systems, and it's something we've spent a lot of time working with our consultants from Oxford Computer Group on how to replicate this within MIM. Because as we merge, we can't turn one off and turn the other on. We've got to have the two running simultaneously. And basically what it's doing is it's taking a whole load of identities and it's saying what matches. Is it your first name, last name, date of birth, address? And it's really one of the areas that has picked up some of our more interesting stories. So what I'd say is if you're doing identity management, if you can imagine it might happen, it will. So we had a situation where two students, they're on the same course, they live at the same address, they're twins, they're identical twins. And we think, well, that's easy, we'll use their first name. Okay, it's different, but they might have spelt it wrong. So our algorithm says, well, as long as it's the same letters, we'll accept it. but they're called Jean and Jane. And that was a bit of a challenge, and trying to automate that. So there are some things that you may just never be able to do. You may have to do a manual process, but really those are the exceptions. So the other one that has always caught us out is professional names. So where an academic turns up and their record on the HR system is one thing, but they want to be known as something else. So we have an idea of preferred forename. It's easy, you know, you want to be Bob instead of Robert, but we have preferred surname as well, because it's not always the one that you were known as. And actually that has stood us in quite good stead over time in terms of some of the international students. So we can say, give us the name on your passport, and then what's your preferred forename and surname, because they often give you something different. And they switch it around, and they hyphenate it. So our algorithm tries to pick all of those out. Some of the other things in terms of the difficulties of this algorithm are things like gender reassignment. So the first time we had one, it was pretty painful in terms of how would we manage that process. You know, we were having to change forenames, change gender. The algorithm said, well, it'll only match people if they're all male or all female, but of course that's not the case anymore. Do we change the old records? Do we keep the old? You know, it was a difficult process. One of the other ones we've had is people dying as students. So a student dying, how do you, in your identity management system, make sure that everything gets updated properly quick enough? You know, the worst thing you can do is to start sending out an all-student email that lands on somebody's desk that's being forwarded to their parents. So actually making sure that you pick up on those things. I've got a whole load of other odds down here. So we had gender reassignment. Titles is the other one that's been interesting. So with titles and also sort of prefixes, Mr., Miss, Ms, trying to match things on those is quite difficult. So you say, okay, you're doctor, you could be all sorts of other things. So you might have a record on the HR system that's doctor, but on the student record system is Mr. Or it's an old record, you've changed from one to the other. And so in many cases what we've done is to actually not use them. So we use them in the matching algorithm and we can match it, but when we display stuff we don't. So our campus card, it doesn't have a title and it doesn't have your first name, it just has an initial. Because we got so fed up of people saying, I want to be called Bob on my campus card, well, not Robert. And every system wanted a different variation, so we just kept simplifying it down. We haven't quite got to the point of saying, we'll just put your staff number. But we maybe just have to give people numbers and go with that. So, I mean, I'm quite happy to sort of talk through some of this with people afterwards in terms of some of the other bits of the algorithm, but it really is about trying to be as automated as we can and pick up those oddities that do come up. So basically the identity management system was launched in 2006. It was a nightmare. We were putting a new student record system in at the same time. The student record system went in 2 weeks before start of year. We had 2 weeks to fully test and roll out the identity management system. And it's fair to say that it was not pleasant. The team, there were 3 of us at the time. We clocked up, I can't remember what it was, but between us we averaged 18 hours a day for about 12 weeks to try and fix it. It was quite fun, but it was a bit painful. But really the biggest problem was just data quality. We had assumed that a lot of stuff would be correct and it wasn't. And so there was a lot of stuff about trying to force people to update data. So within the identity management system, we've put a lot of checks in that are on top of whatever the application does. So we won't accept a record if it says you're Mr. and you're female. Surprising how many we get. We won't accept records where we get things like 1st of January 1960 as a birthday. It's almost always a quick. So, you know, there are other checks to make sure we do let them in if it's legitimate, but you know, there are some things that we get too many of. So we put a lot of that sort of stuff in. And basically what that did do was it formed a principle at the university which has really driven things going forward, which is we don't have queues. There were so many queues that year. We had people queuing, you know, off the campus to try and get things. And often it would be the same people. So they would try and get their IT account, and then they'd try and get their campus card, and it didn't work and whatever. And so everything we've done since then is around not having queues. So there's a slide later on, I'll talk to you about our pre-enrollment process where we just make sure everything's done before people get there, which has its own interesting things. So really, 2006 was when we really started doing identity management properly. So this is just a slide in terms of our campus card. So alongside all of the electronic identity management, there's the sort of physical side. And we were starting with magnetic stripes. We wanted to change our systems at the same time. And this is really just the long-term view in terms of moving to new identities. So where we are at the moment is we're just moving to Identifier cards for those that are technical. And we're probably within about a month of being able to ditch the campus card and put it on your mobile phone. So it's really about, we've been trying to merge identities as we go along. As a system gets replaced, try and use the most modern identity rather than let people keep using the old mag stripe so that we can eventually get rid of it. And that's just an ongoing process. And it's really one of the things I wanted to sort of end with in this is about the long-term strategy. You just got to get it in your head what you're trying to aim for and keep it every time you change something. Keep reasserting that. Because otherwise you end up getting diverted and putting something in that stops you moving forward. So 2009, I don't know how many, it's very timely actually. November the 11th, 2009 was a great event at UEA where our climate science unit got hacked. It was just before the Copenhagen summit. And basically the climate science was potentially discredited by it. We were in the news all over the place. We had special branch crawling all over us because as an incident, it was completely undermining government policy. So it became a national incident. And really, it focused everybody at UEA on our security is not very good. We need to do better. So really, at that point, there were some other things around the same time. There were some other universities, councils that had some data loss. But really, we just had to move forward. We just, this was just some of the newspapers. I was at a CISG conference in St Andrews on the day, and we sort of had to rapidly fly back home. And so what it did do is it actually highlighted the fact that because of that, we were then the target for hackers in a big way because people were trying to get more data. And so we had to do some things fairly rapidly to try and shore that up. And really, we also noticed that there was a lot of problems with our authentication and role-based access, that we had these variations across the site. It was really just as mobile phones were coming in, it was people accessing data from different places. And so there was quite a shift really in terms of what we were trying to do. And also at the same time, it was the whole growth of social media. And at the time, we were thinking, we want to put lots of UEA content in student space. Of course, what we've learned over time is the students don't want you there. They want to use their space for their stuff, you keep out of it, but they want to use their identities. So actually, at the time, we thought we would try and hook in and put our content in their space, whereas now we're saying use your identity to get into UEA space. This is a few of the 36 different logon screens that we had at the time. So although everyone authenticated on Active Directory, there was a different logon screen to everything. Absolute nightmare. We were telling students, we won't ask you for your username and password by sending you an email out or something, but then we gave them no idea about whether the site they were logging into was legitimate or not. So that was a big thing for us to change. So really that's the point around 2009-10. We put a service in, a product called Vintella, which is AD authentication for Linux. And so all of our Linux Unix boxes are hooked directly into Active Directory. They use the Active Directory group structure. So that really brought our whole infrastructure together so that we just had that single directory. That was quite a big thing really because it enabled us to do that. We then moved a lot of our systems, were still on either local admin, but we started moving them to LDAP and SAML as we started getting there. So we hadn't really got the SAML bit sorted at that point. So 2010, really, we did a review of our identity management and looked at really where are we, what do we want to do over the next 5 years, This was one of the things that came out of it, was really that on a sort of maturity curve, the red dots are things we weren't doing, the greens are things we were, and we were spread across the board. So some of the stuff we were really up there with the market leaders with our in-house system, and some of them we weren't even doing. So we needed to really look at, it was an internal system, cost of developers, there were some functions we needed to recode, and really we wanted to look, is it worth recoding it, or do we look outside? At the time, there wasn't really anything that was going to give us that level. Some of the things we were doing at the top end of this weren't available. So FIM as it stood then just wouldn't have done it. So we decided at that point to just do a bit of a pause and schedule a replacement for this year. This was a slide I did back in about 2010, and it was really looking at, although we're a campus university, students might as well be remote. You know, they're in a coffee shop, they're in the library, they're on 3G, they're not on our network. And actually we needed to come up with a way of giving them much better access, a sort of on-campus experience when they're not at UEA. So it's really, that was a sort of change in the market really in terms of that. So that sort of brings us up to date. We implemented some other things to try and plug the gaps, password self-help. Single sign-on for us in terms of SAML, we did a big piece of work in that 2013, where really we've pretty much put all of our web-based systems through a single identity provider. We don't just do the single sign-on side of it. What we also do is a lot of attribute release within the SAML attributes. So we're hooking that back into the identity management system. So when you sign on to a resource like you know, Science Online or whatever, it knows your staff, your student, you're a visiting lecturer, whatever it is. So we don't do a data feed, we just pass the attributes with the assignment token. And really that, even with some of our systems, we've auto-provisioned the users that way. So we don't provision any users. You sign in, it picks up your credential, it's got a bunch of attributes with it, and it creates your ID and you're away. So that's quite a nice way of actually enhancing SAML to actually use those tokens. So this is just a list of our authoritative systems. So we've got about 8 major systems that feed data into the system. So our access control system, sort of campus card number and issue number. Accommodation, so that feeds rooms to the, so we know which access to give to accommodation on the physical cards. Associate institutes, that's a whole bunch of stuff, and that's one of the things that's really caught us out a lot of times. So we had a period where we had UEA London. We've had various colleges that we've been partners with. We have a bunch of students from Guernsey that do a nursing course. And these are all the people that aren't really UEA students or staff, but they sort of are. So there's a whole set of processes around bringing those in. Building management system deals with a lot of our room and building changes. The HR system's obviously all the staff records. And actually we've done a big piece of work to move all of our honorees into our HR system. So if you're appointed as a UEA honoree, you're actually on our staff system. And that gives us some control rather than academics just saying, oh, I'm an honoree, I need access. And you go, well, really? And then the student information system, telephony, is where we master our room data from. So if you change rooms, you tell telephony, they update it, and it feeds all the other systems. And then visitor and group management, and the visitors, that is the nightmare. So that's something like 30 different people types. It's sort of fishermen, teachers in schools, visiting lecturers, 16-year-olds who happen to be the son of a department head who happens to be in over the summer and wants to get on the network, all of that sort of stuff. But Active Directory is that single point, so all of these will have an account, and then single sign-on is sort of about 20 applications. In terms of outgoing, this is just some of them. So really it's the whole range of university systems, so we feed as much as we possibly can, and it's all as automated as we can get it. So then in terms of group management, we're not just talking Active Directory groups. We've got all of these different types of library rights, whether you're X-Directory, website roles, car permits, and all of these groups are auto-provisioned within the identity management system. So we can actually say, go to a record, you can look at it and say, what groups are you in? What do you have access to? And the other thing to say on those is that it's one of the challenges really is people with multiple identities. So we've got plenty of people who have 2 staff contracts, and they might also be a student. So they might be doing 2 part-time jobs and be a student. How you decide which rights they get, because if they're a student, you may not want to give them access to the student record system that they need as a member of staff. And actually deciding how you manage those, what their primary identity is. So we have sort of 3 ways of doing it. You can either do it based on your primary identity, which is your most relevant one, which we calculate. So normally it would be that your full-time staff would be the most appropriate. Or we can do it based on a combination of all of your identities, what you would get for everything. Or we can do it based on a single one. So we can say you only get this if you've got a student record. So it's really that granularity of trying to manage how we sort of give people the right stuff without having to make decisions about it. So this was the one I talked about, pre-registration. So this is this year. Start of year was, I think, 22nd of September, sometime around this year, I think. This was the process of people uploading their campus card photographs before they arrived at UEA. And at the moment they upload their photograph, they get their IT account. So they will have their IT account before they arrive. And they'll have access to Blackboard. And when they arrive, the first thing they do over arrivals week, go and get their accommodation. They're handed their campus card at that point. They've got full access to the library, IT, everything from the moment they arrive. And I think this year we handed out 90% of all of the cards by the end of the Monday, about 4 o'clock on the Monday, first Monday of term. The problem is that the students don't actually talk to anyone anymore. When they queued, they used to get to know each other. And so actually now, we don't really have a Freshers' Week. It sort of just starts. And last year and the year before, we actually had a group of people looking at ways to form queues. So it was, what could we get the students to queue for? Because actually, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's even standing here, you're more likely to talk to the person standing behind you in the queue while you're waiting for something than if you're just standing having a coffee or something. And so there's some interesting dynamics there about if you automate it all, you can actually end up with students that arrive, go to their room, got their IT account, log in, email home, get homesick, haven't seen anyone for a week, drop out. So it's not a good experience. So that's been one of the challenges for us, is actually as we try to get rid of the queues, it's actually had a bit of a kickback. So this is the picture that it's not really a saucepan. It's more like a calendar, because over the 10 years we've gradually punched holes in it. And I think some of the things, the real challenges for us about institutional memory, I've been there a long time. I know why we did stuff. And I can say, no, we don't do it that way. We do hub and spoke. And people go, oh, no, that's too difficult. Let's just do a point-to-point data feed. And it is trying to stick with that and trying to, if you're going to do it, you've got to stick with it. Otherwise, what you end up with, we've got one situation at the moment where we did a feed from our HR system to finance, and now the finance system is feeding our research management system. But the identities aren't the same as the ones coming from our student record system. So it's just caused us a bit of a nightmare. So it's really trying to keep it. So in terms of benefits, we've got this sort of institution-wide acceptance for the requirement of the data quality. So what we do at the moment is we've point-blank refused to import a DUF record. The user will get an email back saying you've just put a DUF record in, please fix it. So we actually pick them up and throw them back. And that has had a massive impact in terms of people's actually ability to sort of get it right first time. In terms of implementing new systems, it can take us sort of about a week probably to bring a new system on board in terms of data feeds, authentication. Quickest one we did was 2 hours, and that was where we were provisioning via SAML attribute release. So we just configured the SAML, released the attributes, and it auto-populated, and it was all done. That was cloud hosted. And we know that the data's right, the authentication's right, and it's sorted. We've got that control over access that we wanted. Data retention, we've got control, but we struggle to do it. But because all the data's there and we know what records we've got and where the master record is, we can identify those and then try and work through it. So that's a bit of a project at the moment. And the dedupe process really has been a massive benefit. It's just taken so much out of sort of manual process. Challenges, ad hoc solutions. It's so many people think, oh, it'd be quite quicker to do this, and yeah, it probably would, but in the long run, it's more work. So we've really had to try and force people to do it the long way and do it right. I've mentioned institutional memory. I think the complexity of managing the changing delivery patterns has been a real big one for us. So when we started with identity management, we had this concept of you're either active or you're not. So your record would become active as a student 30 days before you join, and it would deactivate 45 days after you leave. Staff, it's the day you join, the day you leave. Actually, we want to do you're nearly active. You're just being active for the first week. You're about to deactivate, and it's those subtleties of actually being able to put a status that's based on a sort of a time that something might happen. The new disruptive technology, mobile, Facebook, the iPad, I don't know whether you noticed on the timeline, the iPad sort of came in 2010, it doesn't feel like it, but just such a difference in terms of people using mobile devices and actually saying we've got to manage an identity that's somewhere on a device that we have no control over, on a network we have no control over, but we want to give them secure access to a university resource. And that's really changed, pushed us down the sort of SAML route to try and just standardise on that and push it out. And I've already talked about the reduction in touch points. You know, that's the whole queuing thing. So what we learnt really, starting with strategy and the data model, it's really benefited us because we just keep going back to it and saying, we're doing it because we're going to get to here. Setting the clear principles and sticking to them, that's the whole have the saucepan and not the colander. You know, if you start breaking the principles you've got, you start punching holes in it. Think long term. The next one, don't let people get involved in making decisions. That's a personal one of mine. Automate it. The moment somebody gets involved, they'll find a way of breaking the process, and they'll also put a process in that involves a paper form. And so what we had originally with the identity management, we could provision a person within 5 minutes of them joining. We're now up to about a day and a half because there's now a fill a form in first and then we'll do something. So really it's just try and automate it out. So if there's a rule that says you can have something, give it to them. Don't rely on identities being unique, I've already talked about that. And there is always someone else with the same details. So one of the other ones we had was 2 students. I'll call them John Smith. They weren't. David Smith is our most popular name at UEA. But 2 students, John Smith, same address, same course, different years. The only thing different about them was their date of birth. So is their student record wrong? Not sure. Turns out 2 John Smiths, same birthday, 2 years apart, same student residence. So because we knew a previous residence and a new one, and actually you get these funny patterns and you're just like, oh, you know, is it the record that's wrong? Is it something else? And actually it's just trying to understand those things. So futures, we're in this process of rolling out Microsoft Identity Manager. Temporal sets is one of the big things for us. This is a concept within MIM that you can have these time-based groups and sets. So you can say, you know, be a member of this within the last week of your record, your student site or whatever. So that gives us that ability to say that we can have this sort of transient groups that change over time depending on the time series. Workflow is another big one. At the moment we don't have much within our identity management. So this is really about the request process for things like visitors, that we can workflow it. We can say you can create a request online, we can put the approval process in, and then it doesn't need to touch the help desk at all. And then really the sort of metadata architecture, what we're based on at the moment is a sort of in-house Oracle solution. Obviously, going with a more robust commercial option, we can get more people to support it, we can get development staff, we can get consultancy. So it just gives us a much more robust background. We currently have some Open Athens. The latest release of that allows you to use Open Athens just for the federated login for UK Fed, which ADFS doesn't do. Actually, so that will just hook those two together. We'll just have the single ADFS login screen. Recent announcement from Microsoft about AD and ADFS being able to have this sort of very much hybrid cloud, AD and ADFS in the cloud. That cuts, we've got a lot of cloud hosted solutions. At the moment, if our network goes down, which it has done in the past, that's my time up. That if it goes down, then obviously you lose all your authentication. So really moving those into the cloud as well. And then the latest one really is the JISC Ascent, which is, some of you have heard of Moonshot, which is taking SAML and EduRoam and really linking the two together and saying actually you can have sort of physical logins to stuff on your campus based on a federated identity. And that's really quite a big one. So that means for us, NHS, we have a medical school, we have a lot of consultants who come in, we have to give them an IT account. We can just say, use your NHS account, we're not going to provision you. And also visiting students. So that's where we got to. Any questions? Was that the right time?
Yes.
Good.
A couple of minutes for questions.
Yes. We'd have had longer testing. I mean, what we're doing with our current project is we're doing a lot of very much unit testing on looking at running the whole process, working out what identities we will get. It is incredibly difficult. We were merging records from different systems that we'd never merged before. And I guess what we probably have done is, it's really hard because you can't necessarily do a small scale, just a few. You can't test every record. It really, I don't know, to be honest. I think we'd have just not trusted the data that was coming in. You know, assume your student record system data is rubbish. That somebody has just, they couldn't be bothered to get the date of birth, so they just whacked the same one for everybody. They can't be bothered to put first names in, so they've just done initials. Or it's that sort of thing. It was really basic stuff, but we assumed it would be correct, and it wasn't. It was worse than that. It was some people didn't get anything. Some people got an account one day, and then it was merged with someone else's the next day. So a new record came on, and it merged. So we had and then we ended up with people who had merged with like 8 different accounts, and we had to try and work out who do they belong to. So we had to try and unpick it and get the account back to the person that should have had it. Yeah, it wasn't very pleasant. It was, I actually quite enjoyed it, but it was, it's one of those things when you're an IT person, you go, oh, you know, I insist that there were only 400 people that were affected. Nobody else believes me, but I reckon it was 400 people queuing 10 times. But, you know, it doesn't really matter, does it? So
the checks you mentioned on fields and data would have, if you put those in right at the start, would have...
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff we've got in terms of fields and checks now, I don't know the exact number, but I think the number of people we get bad dedupes on is probably, Ian, do you know? It's probably less than 10 a year. It just happens in the background. So, you know, you will always get the Jeans and Janes, but in general, all of the checks eventually have stopped it, but it was a very painful learning process of not relying on national insurance number. Any other questions? Yep.
I have a sort of a rule of observation, which is that there are exceptions to everything.
No, there aren't. So what we have is we have the rules engine has 2 modes it can operate in. So we have 36 master fields that will drive most things. So that will be, you know, your full-time, part-time, department, course you're on, building you work in, whatever. It's a whole load of stuff. And that will drive most of the stuff. Then what we have is self-managed groups. And those we can delegate to a user via our web interface to actually say, well, you can add people if you want. And any group can have a combination of an automatic rule, and then you can have a rule which is excluding some people, or adding 1 or 2 extras. So you can always add a few extras in there, but in general we try to automate it so that people don't like managing that sort of thing. So if we can, what we also try to do is to say that we manage access based on monitoring and reporting rather than stopping. So if you can't stop somebody going in a room, why, you know, they can always walk through the door, just let them in and then see whether they shouldn't have been there. So there's a lot more of that sort of side of things, of giving people slightly more access than maybe they need, but actually monitoring it. One more?
Can I ask, just to see if I'm correct in my own thinking of how you do things, if somebody comes into the HR business, need for staff, and with your identity management system, in order, does your IDM system look at a number of fields to see if they're new, and therefore need a new ID account? Does it use first name, staff ID, and national insurance number?
So,
Or is it one out, or?
no, the record will come in. It will look at about 20 columns. So it'll things like home phone number, postcode. Those are pretty low down the list in terms of priority, but they help us differentiate where we get problems. It will look at the identity management system that we have at the moment has a record for every feeder system. So there will be, for me, I've got 6 records, main rows in the system, and it will match me with any one of those 6. So it will say, okay, I know what your address was when you were working there, and you know the different roles I've had, and so it will match it. That's one of the challenges we've had with MIM, is actually it doesn't work in that way. So we're having to slightly change that, but we still need to get the dedupe to be the same. Otherwise, when we turn it on, a whole load of people will get unjoined. So that's a bit of a challenge at the moment. So, but I can go through that more with you. I've got some further slides that have got more sort of the techie data on which fields we're interested in and stuff like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just thank Jonathan.